This show contains language that is unsuitable for children.
Grant us love filled with good intention. May we find peace in the midst of dissension. We not what they make us, though they try to break us. And seeking love us, giving love.
Hey, welcome to Giving Myself Permission podcast. I am your host, Dr. Penny Murray. Now, this space is for anyone who knows the urging of our life's purpose, but still, for some other damn reason, our emotional scars manage to silence and restrain us. Here, we focus on learning to give our conscious selves permission to feel, to remember, and to release our sacred expressive life force, that part of us that has always been there and is simply waiting for us to tap into that guidance. Now, in each one of our episodes here, I explore psychological self-reparation and the best way to reimburse our inner sacred expressive life force what it is owed, our emotional attention and care. We gotta stop waiting for or expecting others to value our inner well-being and start trusting that part of us that knows the way forward. Now, on this path of psychological self-reparation, it might feel uncomfortable, but is in fact sacred. So just breathe and walk with me. All right. Giving Myself Permission is brought to you by the Learning Spa Cultural Inner Wellness Retreat. That's my vision for a revolutionary path to psychological self-reparation, where inner wellness is a proactive commitment and not a reactive liability in the African-American community. Now, although we're still in the early stages of development, you can help me bring this vision to life by visiting pennymurray.com. That's PENNIEMURRAY to learn more about my plans and to contribute to the building fund. I really would appreciate your support, and I thank you in advance. All right. Let's start with an ancestral download. I love doing this because it sets the tone and vibration of our time together as a ritual where we can take a moment to give ourselves permission to cut through the noise of the day and receive sacred wisdom, reclaim our breath and our minds and our creative magic. Now, the ancestral download for this episode is coming from The Alchemist. The book, it was written in 1993 by Paulo Coelho, probably pronouncing that name wrong. But anyway, in the introduction of his book, he talks about the many languages that the book has been translated into and the millions of copies that have been sold. He mentions that people began to ask him what the secret was to such huge success. Coelho said that my one honest response is, I don't know. All I know is that we all need to be aware of our personal callings. He goes on to ask and answer the question, what is a calling? Now, for him, he says that the calling is God's blessings. It is the path that God chose for us here on earth. Whenever we do something that fills us with enthusiasm, he says that we are in fact following our legend. Now, however, he says that a lot of us don't all have the courage to confront our own dreams. And then he goes on to ask why. And he lays out 4 obstacles that keep us from taking ownership of our divine legend. First, he says from childhood forward, we're told that what we want to do is impossible. And as the years accumulate, so do the layers of prejudice, fear, and guilt. So our calling gets buried under layers of anxiety. The second one, he says, is love. I was kind of like, what? Okay, well, let me just go with this. And he says that we know what we want, but we're afraid of hurting others by setting boundaries or abandoning situations and people to pursue our life's purpose. The third thing he says is that fear of the defeats we might meet along the path. And then fourth, fear of the realized dream. We're afraid of that. And the mere possibilities of getting what we want may cause us to feel guilty, a sense of unworthiness, anxieties of failure, and the imposter syndrome. My dissertation was on the fear of success within the African American community. And so this really made sense for me. I want to circle back to the third obstacle, fear of the defeats we might meet on the path. Now, Coelho says that those of us who fight for our dreams suffer far more when it doesn't work because we can't fall back on the excuse, well, you know what, the hell with it, I didn't want it anyway. We can't do that. We can pretend to be dismissive in the face of that loss, but we know it's a lie, and so does everybody else around us. Our soul's energy speaks louder than the denial that we want to sit in. Now, not only do we want it, but we've also staked everything on it. Here's the thing. We understand that pursuing our personal calling is no easier than any other path, except for the fact that our whole heart is in that journey. And when our whole heart is in it and it doesn't come to fruition, we suffer despondency. When I was in business for myself and I got there and then lost it, I tell you, it took me years to get over that shit. That was devastating for me. Now, Coelho, let me go back because he mentioned that our calling is the path that God chose for us here on earth. I want to just also kind of add to that. Here's how I look at it. We're standing there in spirit saying, in this time and dispensation, I'm going to need somebody to do this particular task. And at that point in time, I think when we are in spirit form, we say, hey, pick me, I'll go. And we agree to embark upon that particular path. So we're not just like foot soldiers, okay, I'm going to go mindlessly. We're actually following the flow of that spiritual agreement. Now, not only do we have to be aware of our calling or our spiritual agreement, we also have to understand that when we start the journey towards that dream, that calling, that divine legend, we don't always have a lot of experience. So we make mistakes. And the mere thought of that is stressful as hell because we're like, oh my God, I don't want to be a failure. And so we're stressed out about that. So if pursuing our calling, our divine legend, our spiritual agreement, if that brings on more suffering and stress, why are we so hell-bent on finding and living our life's calling if it's only going to lead to more suffering? Now, those of us who know the craving of a dream or ambition, it's a simple answer there. We know the importance of intrinsic fulfillment, and to not even try to pursue and realize our purpose would be like tolerable misery, just a slow drip that goes on for years without us noticing how it wears down our souls until we're soaked in bitterness and resentment, and that begins to consume our lives. So the ancestral download tells us that we have to understand that when we start the journey towards that calling, we don't have a lot of experience. So we make mistakes. We need to be patient during the tough times when we're trying to fulfill those callings, because we're in this space now that all of us are being called to the front line with our gifts and talents. And we have to trust that the universe is conspiring in our favor beyond what we can see, even if we don't know how it's being done. And this really supports the European Christian Bible that says, don't grow weary in well-doing, because in the appropriate season, you'll reap a great harvest if you don't lose heart and give up. Now, I want to get into what I want to talk about in this particular episode. As a Black woman, VP Harris's loss really hit me hard, and I'm still agitated sometimes. Sometimes it's more where I feel an outrage because of the horrible pain being inflicted on the lives of so many people. And it didn't have to be this way, but sexism and racism chose hate over humanity. What adds to my anger is that I live in blood red North Dallas, Texas, and my neighborhood is full of MAGA supporters. We're talking about cult-like MAGA fans. Some of the houses have 2 Trump flags on them. But for me, the election of Felon 47 and all of this diabolical shit that's going on, it just pisses me off. And some weeks are just worse than others. And so I keep asking divine oneness, what part do I play in preserving not just my life, but the soul of humanity in this God-forsaken time? And I get all kinds of spiritual downloads, just like I'm sure everybody else does as well. And I want to talk about at least one of them in this particular episode. But before I get to today's discussion, I gotta do my 2 cents. I see this section as a call to the ancestors and honoring of Black history, not just, once a year, but as a sacred continuum of memory, meaning, and momentum 365. It's where I get to share short lessons to help reclaim our inner wellness through self-reparation. So let's jump into our mini lesson for this episode. And I'm going to go back to Melodoma Patrice Somme's book, Ritual, Power, Healing, and Community. I believe in us returning to the ritual of reconnecting with the universe. So based on Melodoma's teaching, he said to be attracted to an ancient way of life is to initiate one's personal, spiritual emancipation. By that, I think he means that if our desire is to engage in the ancient way of rituals, then we have to free ourselves from any kind of system or dogmatic approach to practicing reconnection rituals and to create and affirm our own. He confirms that no ritual can be repeated exactly the same way. And so if that be the truth, then we can in fact create our own, and we don't have to go through this BS of, oh my God, I got to do it just this way. And it's got to be this and that. I just don't believe in that. So for me, it's always about doing simple things that resonate and enable me to follow the energy flow, reconnecting and tapping into the divine channel between the natural world and the ancestors. And while I can't stand dogma or performative religious practices of any kind, I do believe that there should be some kind of scaffolding or an outline. To make this more relatable, I want to use the travel analogy. I'll call this ritual travel itinerary. And I'm basing this again on Malodoma's work. Now, there are 5 stops on this ritual itinerary. The starting point, that's the 1 stop, 3 layovers, and then the arrival point. Okay, so we start with the starting point. And this is about placing ourselves in a position or a state of welcoming our divine allies into that space or into our consciousness at that time. All right. So the space or the environment must be open in a way that is in fact sacred. And sacred means where the spirit occurs. Now, sacredness is more than just religious spaces or objects. When I'm out walking, the sacred space at that time is my body, my consciousness in the flow of the universe. And so that becomes the sacred space. It's how we interact with the universe, the ancestors, and each other as extensions of divine oneness that influences our lives on a day-to-day basis. So our starting point is to put ourselves in a state of being receptive and open. The second thing, and this is our first layover, and our first layover is in opening and invocation. The ritual space is open whenever our divine allies are called into our day or a specific activity. For me, I request protection first, and then that space is sacred and safe, allowing only what is of my highest good to come into my conscious mind. The second layover is dialogue. This is the kind of sincere conversation with our divine allies and with ourselves that is intentional and has a different temperature or temperament in it. The quality is different in the conversation. Now, mind you, If you were to follow me and I'm talking to my ancestors, you would think that I'm just talking to another person. But still, the conversation is quite different, more pure and honest than I would be talking to anyone else on a physical plane. Because you guys know as well as I do, when we're talking to other people, we'll leave out half of the story and shit like that because we don't want them to know all of it. But in this sacred dialogue, it's all out because they know it any damn way. So the third layover is repetition. Now, this action or structure in a ritual, this is where it is the same. For instance, when I start my day, I have a singing bowl in my living room, and I bring them into my space by ringing that singing bowl. And that is an always thing. So that is a repetition that happens to honor that connection that I have with the ancestors. And then finally, there is closure, and that's the destination. Okay. Rituals must be closed with a statement of completion and gratitude when we're ready to return to our everyday, activities. And I always think of this as if I called somebody on the phone, I don't just, when I'm through talking to them, I just don't hang up the phone. Now, some people do. They don't say, okay, I'll talk to you later or thanks or whatever. They just click and you're like, what the hell? And this is the same thing. This is how I see this in the same way. When I'm coming back to day-to-day activities, of course, I don't ever, since this is a day-to-day thing and I'm calling them into my day, that closing doesn't happen until the end of the day when I'm getting ready to go to sleep. But nonetheless, I'm still closing that day out in gratitude. And you got to do that, especially if you're actually calling them into a specific task that you're doing. And once that task is done, then you want to give them that thanks and that gratitude. Now, the most crucial point of the ritual itinerary is, in fact, the opening and the closing. How you call them in, and you're going to make sure that you close it out when you are complete for that day or that particular activity. Everything else that happens in between those 2 points, it comes from the energies that is from the depths of your soul. And so that's what makes the experience unique for us. So now there are various rituals. Some are more ceremonial and consecrated and in structure. But what I'm talking about is our day-to-day ritual of staying connected with the energy flow of the universe. So why does this matter? In the words of the late Melodoma Patrice Sommet, who is now an ancestor, he says that when ritual is absent, the young are restless, detached, or violent. The elders are silenced. The grown-ups are bewildered, and the future is dim. As African Americans, we carry generational pain in our cellular and muscle memory. But we can't get it twisted because in our DNA is a fierce, virtuous energy, our sacred expressive life force that has consistently stayed determined, dynamic, regenerative, and absolute throughout generations. And this doggedness has always been the guiding light for us. And we need to return to that light through ritual of alignment and reconnection. And as I've laid out, it doesn't have to be a long, drawn out process. We got to think about what our lives as individuals and as a community look like after this shit show collapses. And trust me, it will crash. But we cannot wait until that happens before we start strategizing our own efforts of cultural preservation. All right. That's my 2-cent deposit in the inner wellness self-reparation investment account.
Hold the keys to the most powerful bank. That's ME National Bank. That's me.
Okay, let's get into the world according to Penny segment. So I'm out walking in my neighborhood, which is a daily ritual for me, trying to get my head wrapped around another bullshit, whatever that's happened and the continued wickedness that's going on in our country from putting a heartless, racist criminal in the highest seat of power in America again. So I'm in my feelings. and one of my neighbors stops me and wants to have a conversation. And I was really trying to be present. I'm sitting there and I'm really trying to focus on what he's saying. And he recognizes that I really wasn't connecting. And so he says, well, you don't seem like yourself. Everything okay? And so I'm like, you know what? I'm going to just go ahead and lay this out here. So I said, I'm knowing this, that he's a big supporter of the Felon 47. And so I told him I was troubled by the horrible harm that this government is inflicting on people's lives. And my heart ached over the loss of simple, decent humanity. And that I was still pissed off over Vice President Harris not winning the election, because none of this shit would have happened. And so I ended by saying to him, I know you're happy because your guy won. Well, his response was kind of puzzling. And so he says, that's not my guy. He's disgraceful. And so I was a little surprised, because in the previous 2 presidential elections, he had boasted about voting for Trump. For me, I had a pinch of hope there. Maybe this time he saw the light. And so I asked him who he voted for. And he says, oh, I always vote Republican, no matter what. So I voted for Trump. And I'm like, I'm totally confused. And I was, wait a minute, wait. You just said Trump wasn't your guy and he was disgraceful. He then went into this long defense about his choice and how Trump and the Republicans were the only ones who could bring back conservative values. I'm flabbergasted. So I'm like, some of the stuff that he was saying was pure nonsense. So I'm pushing back and I'm challenging his thought process and the falsely supported rhetoric he was using to justify stuff. And so out of frustration, he then says something to me that I didn't expect. And it totally shifted the energy. He said in a tone of exhaustion, because when I say I was on him, he was exhausted. He says, well, Miss Penny, people vote their traumas. And then he was silent for a few seconds. And I could tell that something was happening. And my Sacred Expressive Life Force was saying, follow the flow, let it cook. So I was like, I'm trying to keep my composure. And I said, okay, tell me more. We discuss his views a little bit more. And then I say, well, what was the trauma that steered your vote? And I was genuinely curious. His voice kind of shifted to a more melancholy kind of tone as he told me his trauma. And he said that it was around one of his children being gay and the other couldn't stay off of social media. Now I could see his whole body exhale and relax as he went on to explain the trauma he held. Now, I continued to process our conversation and the phrase, people vote their traumas, for days. I realized when he said that, something in me stopped so I could not just hear, but listen more. Not because I didn't believe what he said, but because it was too true. Now, here's a hardworking Black man with a small business, trying to provide for his family, proud of his strong conservative Christian values, and that he raised his children in the church. Still, he votes for a man he admitted was dishonorable, someone he knew was morally bankrupt, but he still chose to vote for him. Not out of an aligned values, but out of wounds he believed others, this political party outside himself, would heal. I'm confused because I'm like, all right, so you're thinking that this political party is greater than the God you say you serve and believe in and you go to church. Okay, that's just me, all right? But you know what? In retrospect, that passing conversation with my neighbor had given me a glimpse into the soul of this country. People vote their traumas. I began to see the weaving of this web. We vote our traumas not just in elections, but also in our everyday choices. We vote our traumas on who we trust, who we choose to love, what we settle for, what we silence or avoid in ourselves and each other. I had just been asking divine oneness what my part is in preserving not just my life, but the soul of humanity during this shit show. And right there on that sidewalk, I got more evidence of the same download that's been haunting me in the best way, which is heal the ouch. That interaction was giving me a clearer picture of what the ouch was. It's not just the surface pain or the shallow symptoms that drive people, but the soul wounds that keeps us performing strength, but still in fear of some impending threat. And for him, the threat was a child that's gay, another one that doesn't want to stay off of social media. And that fear reveals the ugliest part of humanity. So days later, I'm still processing the conversation with my neighbor. And the myth of the Fisher King comes in, and I start thinking about the movie version with Robin Williams, which made me then think about the actual mythical story. I was like, hell, come on now. There's a lot of Fisher Kings in the world. People who know something inside of them is broken, but we never learn how to name it. So we wait in pain, hoping for a savior, a messiah to come along. Our whole lives are scripted around that pain. So, but let me step back a minute to explain the myth of the Fisher King. It's an old medieval legend about a young king who is the last in a long line of British kings. And of course, he inherits the kingdom and the task of protecting the Holy Grail and so forth, so on. But the young king is a warrior, guardian of the Holy Grail and protector of his lands. Then he gets wounded. I can't remember how he got wounded, but depending on which version of the myth that you're reading, the wound was to his groin area, which is a spiritual symbol of his creative and reproductive power. And he can't recover. And so a shame is attached to this wound. And he gets stuck in this loop of hiding his condition and waiting for a chosen one, a hero, a savior, to come and heal him. As the years pass and the savior he had been waiting for never comes, he becomes despondent. And of course, his physical wound combined with now his psychological wound makes the king even less effective. As he sits at the riverbank fishing all day as a means of escape, his kingdom starts to suffer, earning him the name Fisher King. Jumping ahead, spoiler alert, the king does get healed. But the healing didn't begin until someone had the audacity to ask the king a direct question. What ails you? And when I was growing up, I would always get into trouble for something that I said. And my mother would say, it's not what you said, it's how you said it. And that's important here because it wasn't that someone came along and asked the king about his wound, but how it was asked. And I'll come back to the Fisher King in a bit. But in a previous episode, I quoted Marie-Louise von France, who said, one must be wounded to become a healer. Many people experience suffering, but that doesn't necessarily mean you are a healer. We truly become healers only when we learn to give new purpose to the suffering and pain that caused the wound in the first place. So now I'm thinking about the conversation with my neighbor through the lens of the Fisher King, and I come to this conclusion. True healing doesn't come from detached politicians, corporations, or a social system of so-called experts, but from someone who has been broken open by their own pain and has learned how to communicate with the traumas, repurpose them, and walk through it, coming out on the other side with greater awareness. But I've also learned that there are several ways we can come out on the other side of our pain. And two of those ways are as a wounded warrior or a wounded healer. And there's a difference between the two, which I wasn't aware of. And the thing is, if we're unaware of the differences, our emotional scars will dictate our choices instead of living in the energy of our purpose. Now, for most of my life, I identified with the wounded warrior persona. And somewhere along the way, I transformed into the wounded healer. And I'm just going to be honest right now, I'm processing what was the thing that caused the transition, what flipped the script or the switch for me from off to on. I'm still processing that. Because of that, I want to explore these two personas to understand my own transformation. Okay, the wounded warrior is built for fight. And I can relate to it because my life was built on the wounded warrior kind of thing. Not because we choose it, but because life, our social system, history, family trauma required it. So we know how to fight and survive. And that's our language. And I learned it well, okay? We know how to show up under pressure, how to hold everything and everyone together, even when our own soul is in need or is unraveling. But that fight comes at a cost. It keeps you armored. It hardens our tenderness. It turns vulnerability into a threat. And sometimes it restricts our souls to the fake it till you make it performance. The wounded warrior is someone who's still in the fight, and their strength, it's real, okay? But they're not in the fight by choice, but for survival of some version of trauma. We sometimes confuse fighting for healing. We're praised for our toughness, revered for our resilience, but underneath the armor, there's a desperate exhaustion, a fatigue that disrupts our sleep, a rage that's on the edge of being triggered at any time. Now, the wounded healer is different. You've been to that same battlefield and suffered similar pain and loss, maybe even greater. The hurt runs deep, but by sitting with it, you discover a way to understand it, and something shifts. Instead of letting the pain take over, you learn its language and you transform it into a form of medicine. You stop glorifying the fight. You stop trying to outperform the pain or to justify it. You just stop making trauma a welcome companion. It's no longer about survival. It's about pausing, being still, to reflect and heal. And that stillness urges you to look at the wound without flinching, but with curiosity and empathy. And you're able to ask it, what are you trying to show me that I keep running from? Empathy is the difference. Empathy is the gateway. And let's be clear, empathy is a feminine energy, not gendered, not weak, feminine. The energy of stillness, of listening, of nurturing, the power to feel something all the way through, not just around the edges. And that brings us back to my analogy of the Fisher King, a symbol of what happens when we are spiritually incapacitated by pain that no one ever validated, not even ourselves, because we were too busy denying it, covering it up, hiding, doing nonsensical activities like fishing all damn day. Oh, no, our fishing is social media. All right. So based on the myth, the king, who represents the wounded warrior, waits for something to shift without having to do anything to change himself. The wounded warrior is a masculine energy that's out of balance, more logic than reflection, more strength than consideration, physical presence, but emotionally unavailable. It's not that the masculine energy is the problem. It's that without feminine energy, the wounded warrior is out of balance, and the wound becomes the way of life. Now, the king doesn't heal through medicine, a priest, a prophet, or time. He heals because another wounded soldier shows up who can relate to the pain and suffering the king has experienced, as well as the struggle in healing. The wounded soldier doesn't try to fix the king or pity him. Instead of offering strategies or inspirational cliches, the soldier creates a safe space of empathy. And then he asks the question no one else dared to ask. What ails you? He then sits in that space with the king as a visual reminder of the greatness within his soul and his own self-healing power. The nurturing feminine energy of empathy in that one question, asked with sincerity and presence, begins the unraveling of the king's suffering. Why? Because the question didn't come from intellect, judgment, or someone with a God complex trying to fix the king. It came from identification. And it came from the kind of empathy you earn in the trenches of your own suffering. By processing his pain, the soldier became a healer and was then healed enough to hold his wounds differently. He was able to connect with the king because he wasn't ashamed of his own brokenness. He didn't cover it up with a facade of strength. He honored it as wisdom and a source of empowerment. The king, who had lost his voice in the pain, suddenly sees himself in the reflection of someone else who had connected with the power of his sacred expressive life force that brought about his healing. And that was the turning point. In that moment, not only does the king begin to heal, the kingdom starts to heal as well. But the most important thing about the question is not that the soldier asked that question or that the king may have answered it, but it was that the wounded healer met the wounded warrior where he was, right there on the riverbank. And he asked a question with a sincere feminine energy of empathy. Everything changed. Going back to what my mother used to always say, it's not what you say, it's how you say it. Now, let me just bring this home to the African American experience. In the world according to Penny, what makes this myth of the Fisher King symbolic is that it's damn near prophetic for many in the African American community right now. We have been conditioned to be wounded warriors. The indoctrination that martyrdom and resilience are proof of strength. We're told that softness is weakness, that rest is laziness. We've been conditioned to survive, but never taught how to value our own psychological wellness because nobody else valued it. So we're living in constant survival mode as the Fisher King, neglecting our inner wound while still showing up in our community, churches, relationships, schools, the workplace, in the performance of strength. Too many of us are stuck in a state of survival mode. Some of us have managed to move from surviving to thriving. But I'm encouraging us to stop thinking that thriving is the finish line. That's bullshit. There's a whole world out there, Dorothy. There is still a state of flourishing. And then there is cross-pollination in our community that needs to be done. So we have not arrived. It won't come through more grind. It won't come through more struggle. It comes when we allow the feminine energy within us, our sacred empathy, our capacity to feel and be felt, to ask the wound, what do you need from me now? That's when we stop mistaking fight for purpose. That's when we reclaim the medicine we were born with. That's when we become healers, not from contempt of our emotional scars, but because we finally made space to feel them, to communicate with them, to understand their language. Here's the thing. If we don't confront our wounds, if we don't learn to stop, turn inward and ask, what ails me? What ails me? Not somebody else, but what is ailing me? If we don't do that, we unconsciously continue to pass down inherited weaknesses in a barren community. We'll keep calling what is really emotional starvation strength. The moment we make the shift from wounded warrior to healer, everything changes because we're healed enough to hold our wounds differently. The wounded healer is that part of us that says, even though I've been hurt, I've learned something from it. And I can now use that pain to help not just myself, but others. Now, I'm not saying go out here, get a t-shirt and advertise, hey, look at me, I'm a proud wounded healer. No, I'm not saying that. What I am saying is that being wounded is not a scarlet letter of shame. The wounded healer doesn't pretend to be perfect. Instead, we embrace the wound as a source of strength and insight. We discover that our healing and our purpose often come through the very places where we've been broken. We begin to understand that each time life wounds us, it cracks us open even more, giving us more access to our sacred expressive life force. We have no control over all of the external bullshit that's happening in the world right now. And we certainly can't stop what the universe is doing to recalibrate the balance of humanity. But we can all agree that a lot of people are being hurt in ways they may not be able to push through, at least not without some help. So we need more of our wounded healers to come off the sideline. Those who've been in the fire and come out on the other side with softer eyes, who know how to ask others what ails you. Not because we're so brilliant, but because we've had the nerve to ask ourselves the same question.
I swear you gotta stay.
As we wrap up today's conversation, I want to share a self-reparation ritual, a daily practice of staying connected to the energy flow of the universe. Remember, breaking free from emotional scars isn't always loud, boastful, or aggressive. Often it's just a quiet refusal to engage in self-abandonment. So many of us are walking around, as I said, as Fisher Kings, living on autopilot. And we've got thousands of likes on social media, but cut off from the root of our power. I want you to consider, what if our gift, our calling, our power is locked behind the very wound we keep hiding? What if the universe is waiting for us to soften enough to ask ourselves, what ails me? So as we open up our rituals, open up with a statement of protection. This space is sacred. This space is safe. Only that is of my highest good comes through. But let me give you some pre-information in regards to for this, because I'm going to ask you to place your hand at your heart chakra and your sacral chakra, because we talked about that was the issue with the Fisher King. Now, the heart chakra is connected to giving and receiving love, nurturing, compassion, and empathy. And the Sanskrit name of the heart chakra is Anahata, meaning unstuck or unhurt. It symbolizes unconditional love and inner peace. The sacral chakra is associated with pleasure, creativity, intimacy, relationship, reproduction, emotion, and self-worth. So with that information, here's our self-reparation ritual for this episode. Nothing complicated, just a 1 or 2 minute kind of pause. Wherever you are, sitting on the side of the bathtub, walking, or you catch yourself mindlessly scrolling on the phone, I just want you to just pause a minute. Place one hand on the center of your chest, your heart chakra, and the other below your navel. And that's the sacral chakra. And I want you to breathe 3 gentle, deep in and out breaths. After the 3rd breath, continue breathing normally. And as you exhale, silently say to yourself, soften. Repeat this until you feel a connection. Soften. Now, when you feel relaxed, Whisper aloud to yourself, what ails me? Don't rush or force an answer. Just let the question be. Feminine energy doesn't demand, it allows. If you feel anxious, silently repeat to yourself, soften, and allow it to hold you. Don't defend or justify what comes to mind. When a memory, feeling, or ache comes through, don't push it away. Acknowledge it with gratitude. I want you to end with this grounding phrase. I see you. I will not abandon you. Close with a statement of completion and gratitude to anchor your appreciation for this self-reparation ritual. I will no longer be in competition with my wound. I will listen to it. I will let empathy lead me back to my sacred, expressive life force. Ashe. I appreciate you sharing this space with me. I hope you will keep listening and join me in creating your own rituals of self-reparation. If this episode resonated with you, leave me a comment. Better yet, hit that like button because everybody's talking about the algorithm. And I'm no different here because I want not just for likes and applause. I want this message to move out into the ether, into the universe to help those others. This is my work that I've been called to as well. All right. Also, subscribe to the podcast and tell a friend about it. Visit my website at pennymurray.com and get on my mailing list to get notifications about upcoming events. You can follow me on Instagram, Threads, or Facebook at Sacred Expressive Life Force on all of those platforms. Giving Myself Permission is brought to you by The Learning Spa, a sacred vision of psychological reparation and cultural inner wellness. We are building that space prayer by prayer and offering by offering. So again, please visit pennymurray.com. Go to the Learning Spa tab to learn more about how you can be a part of this healing movement and donate to our building fund. Now, later this year, I will be releasing the revised version of my book, Giving Myself Permission, Putting Fear and Doubt in Their Place. And as I get closer, I'm going to, many of the episodes I'll be discussing different things from the book so you get an idea what the book is really all about. I'm also starting something new. It's in the work as well, Black She Mystic Firekeepers. And this is a call to all of us spiritualists, mediums, healers, teachers. So I want us to come together as a community with all of this spiritual downloads and stuff that we're getting from divine oneness and the ancestors. We should be able to use that in a very effective way. And so that's what I'm wanting to do with the Black She Mystic Firekeepers. So look out for that. All right. Until next time, remember, we're in a time where it's all hands on deck, and we must clarify how our sacred activism will be expressed. So just keep in mind, it's not always demonstrated by a protest sign or in a march. Sometimes it's a behind the scenes gestures. Sometimes it's a whisper that says, I am as Spirit created me, endowed with power and authority to manifest positive outcomes and the divine wisdom to bring about meaningful change. Again, thanks for listening. And as always, you are never the victim of life. You are always the student of purpose. So what skill or higher consciousness are you learning? What task or message are you being prepared for? Ashe.